Windows 11 is coming. Here's everything we know. Soon, Microsoft is going to launch what it's calling the next generation of Windows. All signs point to it being called Windows 11. While Windows 11 is getting a full version bump when Microsoft said it was going to use Windows 10 forever, that's not the only reason it's the next generation of Windows. This is a major change. It's representative of a big shift in how Microsoft delivers Windows, but it's also a big UX overhaul as well. Microsoft sent out invitations on June 2nd for a virtual event that will be held on June 24th at, you guessed it, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. If it wasn't shooting for an 11 theme, it would have said the event was at 8 a.m. Pacific Time. The event will be live streamed, and you'll be able to watch it here. Expect to see Windows and Devices Chief Panos Panay take the stage and say the word, pumped, a lot. This is actually going to be Panay's first big event since he took over Windows, a step up from only being in charge of Surface devices. Windows 11 is the biggest update in a decade. When CEO Satya Nadella teased Windows 11 at Build, he said that this is going to be the biggest update to Windows in over a decade. That is a bold statement. Let's take a look back at what's happened to Windows in the last decade. Going back to 2011, Windows 7 was the current version of the OS and Steven Sinofsky was in charge of Windows. Indeed, the fall of Sinofsky, the rise and fall of Terry Myerson, and the rise of Panos Panay as the head of Windows has all happened in that time. In 2012, that's when Windows 8 launched, right alongside Windows RT, the Surface RT, and the Surface Pro. To be clear, pretty much all of those things failed terribly. However, failure or success, love them or hate them, all four of these things represented massive shifts for Windows, and Microsoft as a whole. Let's revisit that for a moment. Windows 8 was radical. It removed the Start menu, a staple of the operating system since Windows 95. It replaced it with the Start screen, a full-screen grid of tiles that scrolled from left to right. If you scrolled down, you'd get to the All Apps list, which was separated by Metro apps and Win32 apps. Oh, right, Windows 8 also introduced this idea of Metro apps. They were full-screen apps that had to be controlled by swipe gestures. To close it, you had to swipe down from the top of the screen, rather than using the familiar X that we've known for decades. To top it off, there was no built-in tutorial for this. Windows 8 did have a familiar desktop environment, along with the full-screen touch environment. It very much felt like a desktop OS and a tablet OS mashed into one. And then there was Windows RT, which failed even harder than Windows 8. This was Microsoft's first attempt at Windows on ARM, except it couldn't run Win32 apps. You were stuck with the new full-screen Metro apps, Internet Explorer as your browser, and a semi-native version of Office 2013 called Office RT. Surface is important too, because while Microsoft had made accessories in the past, it hadn't made computers. The Surface RT was a terrible failure due to Windows RT. The Surface Pro, also named after the OS with Windows 8 Pro, was a failure for a different reason. It was thick, it was heavy, it was small, and it had terrible battery life. The Surface Pro 2 was a spec bump from Intel 3rd Gen to 4th Gen chips, fixing battery life, and then the Surface Pro 3 was the big redesign that led to the product we all know today. Keep in mind that if we're talking about Windows 11 being the biggest update to Windows in the last decade, we're still on 2012. The next few years were mostly about fixing Windows 8 and internally, planning for Windows 10. Metro apps still couldn't be used in Windows, but the familiar icons for closing and minimizing them were added, and they'd finally show up in the taskbar. On September 30, 2014, Microsoft announced Windows 10. The next day, the first technical preview was released and the Windows Insider program was born. We still didn't know much though, and it wasn't until an event in January that we found out more.